Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into a figure who, really weaponized communication in the 20th century, Paul Joseph Goebbels. He wasn't just another politician. He was, you could say, the architect behind the propaganda machine of modern totalitarian.
Absolutely. And when you look at the sources, he clearly emerges as the definitive figure shaping the look and the ideology of the Third Reich. We're talking about someone whose core belief was, pretty stark. Communication isn't about truth. It's not about decency.
No.
It's purely about results, success. And that philosophy, when you apply it to an entire nation, the consequences were catastrophic.
So our mission for you today is to dive deep into the documents that trace this path. We're going from his relatively modest beginnings, his early frustrations, especially in the arts.
Right, the failed writer phase.
Exactly. Then his political conversion, the almost religious devotion to Hitler.
Yeah.
And finally, his rise to absolute power over German information, culture, and that final desperate push for total war, right to the bitter, fanatical end.
And the bigger picture here, why studying Goebbels is still so crucial, is that his career is essentially a textbook case of weaponizing. It really shows how deep personal insecurities, you mentioned the artistic failures, the physical issue, how those can morph into this obsessive political zealot that literally changes.
Personal wounds becoming political weapons.
Precisely. A chilling study in that transformation.
Okay, let's get into it. We have to start where the sources guide us, which is his formative year, a time defined by, maybe surprisingly, a mix of high intellectual ambition and deep social frustration. Goebbels was born in Ried, West Germany, October 29, 1897. The biographies consistently paint a picture of his family background as solidly lower middle class.
Yeah. That's key. Understanding his drive later. They were ambitious, striving, but certainly not wealthy. His father, Fritz, was a foreman in a wick factory.
Right.
The sources put his earnings around 4,000 marks a year. Stable, but not exactly affluent for the time.
And there's that detail about the family piano, bought in 1909.
Yes. A poignant symbol is that aspiration for upward mobility, trying to break into that professional class.
And the family was devoutly Roman Catholic early on. He was apparently very close to his mother, Katharina Maria Ott.
Almost dependent, some sources suggest.
And that Catholic background.
Yeah.
He had to keep bringing it up later, defensive.
Because of those persistent, though unfounded, rumors about partial Jewish heritage in his family.
Right, a rumor he was absolutely desperate to crush once he was in politics.
But what's maybe overlooked sometimes, but really central to his psychology, according to the sources, is his physical health, his early physical history.
Yes, the ill health from a young age.
The defining thing was the club foot.
Right, from osteomyelitis, that bone marrow swelling.
Yeah, happened when he was very young. It left him with this lifelong, visible, physical and he had lung problems, chronic issues.
And you have to think about the psychological impact of that, especially in early 20th century Germany.
Oh, absolutely. A society that idolized militarism, athleticism, this rigid idea of masculinity. His sense of inadequacy must have been profound. And then the huge blow, being rejected for military service in World War I.
In 1914 to 1918, imagine.
Steeped in nationalism, watching others go off to fight, and you're deemed unfit.
Devastating. That failure to serve combined with the visible disability, it fueled something.
The compensation theory the sources talk about seems spot on here.
It really does. His later writings, his whole political drive, it looks like a conscious effort to compensate for those physical shortcomings through intellectual achievement and then political dominance.
The entire political persona as an overcompensation.
It seems that way. And his academic career shows that relentless drive. He thought about the priesthood initially, but then he threw himself into studying. Attended a whole string of top universities, Bonn, Munich, Würzburg, Freiburg.
Impressive list.
Before getting his PhD in German philology from Heidelberg in 1921. And he was only 24. A PhD at 24 is quite something. He published his dissertation too. Clearly productive. Wrote 14 books by 1940.
But the crucial part of his early 20s, the spectacular failure of his artistic dreams.
Yes, and the parallel with Hitler there is uncanny, isn't it? The failed artist trope.
It really is. Goebbels tried everything in the early 20s. Journalist, novelist, playwright.
And got rejected consistently.
These weren't just career setbacks. They felt existential. So by 23, 24, you've got this potent mix. Thwarted ambition, that deep physical insecurity, intellectual power. It created a vacuum.
A vacuum just waiting for political extremism to rush in.
Exactly. A brilliant, resentful mind in a country already in crisis. Which leads us straight into the chaos of the Weimar.
Okay, so now we have Goebbels. Highly educated, deeply frustrated, probably narcissistic, in a Germany just reeling from the Treaty of Versailles.
Yeah, signed after the 18 defeat. And those terms were just brutal. They really shaped a whole generation.
Germany lost huge amounts of territory, helped create Poland, actually, forced to pay these crippling reparations, mostly to France and Britain.
And the military was just gutted, reduced to a tiny force. Plus, the Rhineland, that key industrial area, demilitarized.
So the government that signed this, the new Weimar Republic, was immediately seen as illegitimate by national.
They called them the November criminals. That whole narrative of national betrayal, national humiliation, it became the bedrock for extremist movements like the Nazis.
And for Goebbels, this wasn't just abstract political theory. The radicalization hit home, didn't it?
Intensely personal. The French and Belgian occupation of the Ruhr Valley from 23 to 25, that was because Germany defaulted on reps.
Right.
And it brought the humiliation right to his doorstep.
There's that specific incident the sources highlight. October 22, 1924. His family home searched. He himself interrogated by the occupation police.
He felt it directly, that sense of being oppressed by foreign powers.
And his reaction, almost immediate.
2 weeks later, November 24, he publishes his first really political article. And what's it about? Demanding the release of Adolf Hitler.
Who was in prison then for the failed beer hall push of 23.
Right. By the time Hitler got out in December 24, Goebbels was already involved with the Nazi Party.
What was the initial appeal? The Nazi platform was pretty straightforward, wasn't it?
Yeah, 4 main points, really. Scrap Versailles, rearm Germany, expand eastward Lebensraum, and total exclusion of Jews from German life.
But interestingly, he wasn't a day one Hitler loyalist.
No, not at all. Initially, he was more aligned with Gregor Strasser.
Ah, right. Strasser represented the more socialist wing of the party, anti-capitalist leanings.
Exactly. Goebbels actually sympathized with that for a while, the wealth redistribution idea. But he was also drawn to Hitler's intense nationalism and, crucially, the virulent anti-Semitism. He was torn.
So how did that conversion happen? The shift from Strasser's camp to that absolute, almost obsessive loyalty to Hitler that defined his whole life.
The sources point to late 1925, early 19... Reading Mein Kampf was part of it.
Hitler's rambling autobiography.
Yes, and attending that key party conference in Bamberg in February. That seems to be where Hitler really won him over.
What was the key difference?
Hitler's sheer charismatic authority and the absolute focus on race and national over complex policy, simpler, more potent.
And the sources suggest a psychological element, too, that Goebbels needed a strong figurehead.
Yes, that's a strong interpretation. Characterized as an extreme narcissist, he craved external validation after Hitler provided that in spades.
And a channel for all that pent-up ambition.
Absolutely. Which might explain the intensity of his devotion. It went way beyond just political agreement. It was personal, almost worshipful zealotry.
And Hitler rewarded that loyalty quick. August 1926, he's made Gauleiter the regional party boss of Berlin.
A huge post. Berlin was politically vital, volatile. It became his laboratory for propaganda, a job he kept right until 1945.
So what did he start doing in Berlin? What were the early signs of the Goebbels propaganda stuff?
Visual impact was key from the start. The sources show his obsession with it. Think massive posters.
The red and black ink, the swastika dominating everything.
Exactly. Designed for emotion, not intellect. Pure, visceral impact. He also founded the party newspaper in Berlin, Der Angriff-Tag.
And that wasn't about policy debate.
No, much more about aggressive rhetoric, personal attacks, especially targeting Jewish figures and political opponents, polemic.
And crucially, he didn't separate propaganda from violence.
No, they were intertwined. He used the SA, the stormtroopers, the brown shirts.
Paramilitary thugs, basically.
Right. To stage fights, attacks in beer halls, street brawls. It was calculated chaos. Mass media messaging combined with street-level terror to destabilize the city.
And even though the Nazis were still pretty marginal nationally back then, Goebbels himself got elected to the Reichstag in 1928.
Yes, which gave him a national platform and immunity.
Yeah.
And that's when he made that incredibly cynical statement about his intent.
The quote about entering the Reichstag to use democracy's weapons against itself.
That's the one. Chillingly clear. We are entering the Reichstag in order that we may arm ourselves with the weapons of democracy from its arsenal, that the Weimar ideology should itself help us to destroy it.
An open declaration of war on the system, using its own rules.
It sounded almost absurd at the time, you know. The Nazis only had about 12 then, but the economic storm clouds were gathering. That threat would soon become terrifyingly...
Okay, so the Nazis are still on the fringes. Goebbels has his cynical streak. What was the trigger? What really propelled his propaganda into the mainstream?
One event, primarily, the Great Depression.
The Wall Street crash. October 1929, Black Friday.
Exactly. And it hit Germany incredibly hard. Maybe harder than any other Western nation because of those huge war debts from Versailles.
The economic impact was just catastrophic, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Millions unemployed, savings wiped out overnight. The centrist Weimar government just floundered, unable to cope.
And that created this huge, desperate audience. People were ready for radical answers.
Perfectly primed for the Nazi mess, which Goebbels immediately focused. He simplified everything.
How so?
He centralized the whole 1930 election campaign around one single target. The Versailles Treaty, blamed it for all the misery. It was simple, powerful, and resonated with that sense of national humiliation.
And the election result, September 1930.
Stunning. A massive leap. The Nazis went from being a tiny fringe party to the second largest in the Reichstag, 107 seats out of 577.
Wow. Nearly 1 in 5 voters.
Huge shift. And crucially, you have to remember who came third? The communists, with 77 seats.
So Goebbels could play on that fear.
Brilliantly. He positioned the Nazis as the only strong defense against a Bolshevik revolution, the only bulwark against the specter of Soviet Russia.
Appealing directly to the middle classes, business owners, conservatives, anyone terrified of communism.
Exactly. And he was getting smarter about how he reached these voters, moving beyond just print.
Mastering new media.
Yeah. The sources show his fascination with film, but especially radio. He got it early on.
Why radio?
Print needed literacy, engagement. Radio was immediate, emotional, and importantly, centrally controllable. He saw it as the ultimate tool for mass indoctrination.
We see that clearly in Hitler's 1932 presidential run against Hindenburg.
Oh, absolutely. Goebbels orchestrated that whole campaign. The Hitler over Germany, daily radio broadcasts detailing Hitler flying around the country.
To those massive torchlit rallies, pure spectacle.
He basically invented the modern political roadshow, combining the physical drama with the intimacy of radio. It was designed to whip up fervor among those key groups: women, Protestant, the anxious middle class.
And even though Hitler lost that election to Hindenburg,
the momentum was undeniable. Goebbels had put the Nazis front and center,
which paid off massively in the July 1932 Reichstag.
Yes, driven by the economic collapse, 30% unemployment, banks failing, the centrists looking useless, the Nazis channeled all that public anger. They won 230.
The largest party for the first time, nearly 40% of the vote.
But still not enough to govern alone. So there was another election in November 1930, the last free and fair one, actually.
And the Nazis lost some ground.
They did. Dropped back to 190. Still the biggest party by far, but the momentum seemed to stall slightly.
Which created this parliamentary deadlock and forced the establishment's hand.
Leading to that infamous alliance of fear. Powerful industrialists, military figures, conservative politicians, they disliked the Nazis, feared their radicalism.
But they feared the communists more.
Exactly. They thought they could use Hitler, control him, keep the communists out. A fatal miscalculation.
Which led directly to January 30th, 1930, Hitler appointed chancellor.
In a coalition government initially, and Goebbels immediately orchestrated the spectacle. That massive torchlit parade through Berlin, 60,000 SA and SS members marched.
Political theater backed by brute force.
The message was clear, and the consolidation of power was incredibly swift. Repression against the communists started almost.
Then the Reichstag fire, February 28th.
Instantly seized upon as a pretext. Emergency decrees suspending civil liberty.
Paving the way for the final nail in Weimar's coffin, the Enabling Act, March 23, 1930.
Passed by bullying, intimidation, and physically excluding opponents, especially the communists.
And that act was the killer blow, was it?
Absolutely. It allowed Hitler's cabinet to rule by decree for 4 years. No need for the Reichstag, no need for the president's approval. It effectively dissolved the Weimar Republic.
Goebbels had made good on his 1928 threat, using democracy's weapons to destroy democracy itself.
He had. The stage was set for total control.
So the Nazis have seized power, the Weimar Republic is dead, and Goebbels gets his reward, March 14th, 1933.
Yes, appointed head of the brand new Reich Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda.
Not just an information office, this was designed as the ideological command center for the entire state.
And to understand what he did with it, you have to grasp his core philosophy of propaganda. He already laid it out back in 1928 in that The Art of Propaganda.
And it's chillingly pragmatic, isn't it? Strips away any sense of ethics.
Completely. He said the only measure of propaganda is whether it works.
What were his exact words on success?
Propaganda shows that it is good if, over a certain period of it, it can win over and fire up people for an idea. If it fails to do so, it is bad propaganda. Notice, no mention of truth, fact, morality.
Just results.
Okay.
And then there's that other quote, the really brutal one.
The one that lays it all bare. No one can say that your propaganda is too crude or low or brutal, or that it is not decent enough, for those are not the relevant criteria. Its purpose is not to be decent or gentle or weak, modest, successful.
The ends justify any means.
Precisely. And armed with that philosophy, he set out to build a structure for absolute control over every aspect of Germany. Total mess.
It's why historian David Irving called him the mastermind of the Third Reich, looking at the sheer reach of that ministry.
The scope was incredible. He broke it down into specific departments, each designed for total domination. Broadcasting, press, both domestic and foreign.
Film, censorship, all the art, music, theater, mass rallies.
Even specific departments for things like race issues, youth indoctrination, countering enemy propaganda. It was a vast interlocking machine.
How did it work in practice? Like with the press?
The press branch basically told newspapers what to print. They issued daily directives, detailed instructions. Journalists became state scribes. jobs,
and broadcasting.
total control over radio content, ensuring the state narrative flowed directly into home.
How did he manage conformity in creative fields? Art, music, writing.
Through the Reich Chamber of Culture set up in September 33.
Everyone had to join.
Every artist, musician, writer, filmmaker, journalist had to be a member of the relevant chamber, and membership depended entirely on being politically reliable and racially pure.
So if you weren't a member,
You couldn't work. Simple as that. The arts became completely subordinate to the Nazi cause. Utter conformity enforced.
and he used these big symbolic acts too, didn't he? Like the book burnings.
Oh, yes. Hugely symbolic. The most famous was May 10th, 1930. Berlin, other university cities. Students whipped up into a frenzy.
Burning books deemed un-German.
Over 25,000 works by Mark Freud, Einstein, Remarque, Germany's intellectual giants.
And the irony, Goebbels himself, the PhD in literature, the failed novelist.
Standing there giving a speech at the Berlin bonfire, declaring, "The era of Jewish intellect's at an end. A public ritual enact death."
Chilling. What about film? He saw that as particularly important.
Huge. His preferred medium for subtle, and by March 1937, he'd nationalized the entire German film total.
But he didn't want crude propaganda film.
Not always. He was quite sophisticated about it. He insisted that the National Socialist message should often remain in the background. It had to entertain first, indoctrinate second.
Make it palatable.
Exactly. Propaganda that feels like propaganda often fails. He wanted it woven into the fabric of entertainment, of everyday information.
Meanwhile, he was saturating the country with radio.
Yes, the Volksempfänger. The people's receipt. His ministry subsidized these cheap radios, distributed millions of them,
Why?
to ensure almost every German household could receive the state broadcast, direct access.
And he used it constantly.
Relentlessly. In the first year alone, the sources say over 50 of Hitler's speech broadcast live, plus setting up loudspeakers in public squares, factories, drilling the message in day after day.
This constant ideological bombardment, combined with the rallies.
Yes, the mass spec. Goebbels was the master organizer behind events like the Nuremberg rallies. Remember Triumph of the Will?
Leni Riefenstahl's film.
He orchestrated that whole pseudo-religious choreographed political theater. Immensely powerful vision.
So what was the result of all this? The Nazis only got about a third of the vote in the last free elect, but by the late 30s.
The sources indicate overwhelming popular support. The constant propaganda worked.
The key test being that 1934 referendum.
Exactly. After President Hindenburg died, the vote to merge the offices of Chancellor and President, making Hitler the sole Führer.
And the result,
An official 88% yes vote.
which tells us
While the sources agree it was only partly fraudulent, much of it reflected genuine popular back. Goebbels had successfully manufactured consent.
he'd sold the illusion of stability, strength, national revival.
He convinced a large part of the population that submitting to Hitler was the path to salvation. In his own cynical terms, winning over and firing up the people, his propaganda had been spectacularly successful.
And personally, his star kept rising. He became one of Hitler's absolute closest confidants.
Yes. He was the one chosen to announce Hindenburg's death and Hitler's new role as Führer over the radio in August 34. His own family, he'd married Magda Ritschl in 1931, was even promoted as the first family of the Reich,
underscoring his proximity to the absolute center of power. So Goebbels has consolidated control over information. Now let's look at how he applied that power to one of the darkest core tenets of Nazism, anti-Semitism. His zeal here is striking, especially given his earlier life.
It is a stark contradiction, isn't it? The sources clearly document his earlier, quite close relationships with Jewish teachers, mentors.
And he even dated and seriously considered marrying a Jewish woman, Else Janke, back in the early 1920s.
Right. Which makes his transformation after 1933 all the more jarring. He became one of the most rabid, most active persecutors in the entire Nazi.
Why the shift? Proving loyalty.
That seems a major factor, demonstrating his absolute commitment to Hitler's ideology. Perhaps overcompensating for any perceived earlier it was a performance of total.
And his actions backed up the rhetoric, legislatively and through propaganda.
Absolutely. He personally drove the Reich press law in October 33, systematically purging all Jewish editors from newspapers.
In his diaries.
Filled with entries about his relentless efforts to Jewify German culture. Art, music, film, literature, eradicating Jewish influence was an obsession.
He also launched huge propaganda campaigns to support things like the Nuremberg laws in 1935.
Yes, justifying those horrific laws that stripped Jews of citizenship, forbade marriage or relationships between Jews and non-Jewish Germans, laying the legal groundwork for persecution.
This systematic discrimination then escalated into open violence with Kristallnacht in 1938.
The Night of the Broken Glass, a pivotal moment.
The trigger, or pretext, was the shooting of a German diplomat in Paris, Ernst vom Rath, by a young Jewish man, Herschel Greenspan.
Vom Rath died 2 days later, and Goebbels immediately saw his opportunity.
November 9th, 1938, at an event commemorating the Beer Hall Push he gives a speech.
A masterclass in manipulative ambiguity. He signaled that the government wouldn't officially organize reprisals, but any spontaneous popular anger against Jews wouldn't be stopped. It would be tolerated.
Which everyone understood as a green light. A direct order, essentially.
Exactly. And the result was this nationwide pogrom carried out by SA and SS paramilitaries, but also, disturbingly, by ordinary German
The
citizens.
documented consequences are appalling.
Roughly 100 Jews murdered out. Over 200 synagogues destroyed or badly damaged. Around 7,000 Jewish business looted and smashed.
And critically, the mass arrests.
Yes. Up to 30,000 Jewish men rounded up immediately and sent to concentration camps, Dachau, Buchenwald, Sachsenhausen. These camps were rapidly becoming instruments of terror, not just prison.
And the sources mention hundreds of suicides in the aftermath. The psychological impact was immense.
Kristallnacht really marked the shift from legal discrimination and sporadic violence to systematic state-sanctioned terror, the point of no return for Germany.
Moving towards the war itself. Despite his anti-Semitic fervor, Goebbels seems to have been more cautious about a major European conflict than some other Nazi.
He was, surprisingly, quite realistic about Germany's limitation. At least initially, we have that diary from 40.
Where he says Germany must win that year.
Right. Otherwise, the material superiority of the opposite side would become strong. A war of many years would also be difficult for psychological. He understood the strain a long war would play resources and morale, propaganda.
But despite those private doubts, publicly he was instrumental in justifying all the steps towards war.
Absolutely. He used his ministry to spin Germany's aggressive act, the remilitarization of the Rhine-Recht-Violence.
The Anschluss with Austria in 1938.
And his relentless aggressive editorials demanding the Sudeten-Slovakia. He fueled the crisis.
So when Britain and France finally declared war after the invasion of Poland in September 1930.
Goebbels' ministry switched immediately into full wartime propaganda. He became the state's chief cheerleader, its primary voice justifying the conflict.
Writing hundreds of editorials in his newspaper, Das Reich.
Yes. 218 between 1940 and 45, constantly glorifying the war effort, reinforcing the narrative of Germany fighting for its survival against encircling enemies, maintaining morale became his central wartime task.
Okay, so the war is raged, and Goebbels becomes deeply involved in its two most horrific aspects in the later, the Holocaust, the final solution, and the increasingly desperate push for total war. Let's tackle the final first.
His role here was central, and it started even before the mass. He helped Hitler write that infamous speech from January 30th in 1939.
The one where Hitler explicitly threatened the annihilation of European Jewry if war broke out.
Exactly. The language was already genocide. Goebbels' rhetoric consistently prepared the ground, dehumanizing Jews, making the unthinkable seem necessary.
And the physical persecution escalated dramatically after Poland was conquered, ghettos established.
Warsaw lured, huge sealed-off district. Then the concentration camps expanded, Auschwitz opening in May 1940. And Goebbels personally pushed for more measures inside Germany itself.
Like ordering Jews to wear the Yellow Star of David.
Yes, in September 1941. Making them visible targets, isolating them.
The policy then crystallized at the Wannsee Conference, January 1942.
Which formalized the plan for the systematic extermination of all Jews in Nazi-controlled Europe. The final. Goebbels was fully briefed. His diaries leave no doubt about his awareness. And
that March 1942 diary entry is particularly damning, isn't it?
Utterly chill. He notes receiving the details from Wannsee. He estimates maybe 40% of the Jews could be used for forced labor, but the other 60% they would, quote, almost certainly be liquidated.
Using that cold euphemism while fully understanding it meant mass murder.
No question. And his personal zealotry just intensified. He wasn't just passively aware, he was an active driver of the process.
Producing films like The Eternal Jew.
Yes, in 1940. Vile propaganda depicting Jews as vermin. Paris, creating the psychological climate where ordinary people could become complicit in genocide.
And pushing for faster deportation.
Especially urging Hitler to speed up the removal of Jews from Berlin. He even mused in his diary about whether it wouldn't be more efficient just to liquidate them right there.
Horrifying. At the same time, the war itself was turning against Germany. Operation Barbarossa.
The invasion of Russia, June 1941. Huge initial gain, driven by that Lebensraum ideology, but it stalled. The brutal Russian winter, the endless Soviet manpower.
And Goebbels had to manage the public perception of these setbacks.
Yes. Like in December 41, organizing that big national drive to collect winter clothing for the soldiers freezing on the Easter, trying to spin sacrifice.
But then came Stalingrad, winter of 42-43.
The turning point. A catastrophic Germany. The Soviet victory there really sealed the fate of the war on the Eastern Front. From then on, slow, relentless Russian advance.
And paradoxically, as the military situation got worse after 42, Goebbels' own power within the regime seemed to increase.
It did, because other leaders were failing. Hitler was becoming increasingly isolated, delusional, plagued by illness.
Goering, increasingly sidelined. Sources mention his incompetence, his opiate addiction. Goebbels, in contrast, remained ruthlessly efficient, and, critically, he was one of the few at the top who seems to have had a fairly clear-eyed view of the military reality.
He knew they were likely losing.
The diaries suggest he understood the grim odds far better than Hitler did. And because he saw defeat looming, his response was to demand even greater fanaticism.
Which led to his call for total war.
Exactly. From early 1943 onwards, he argued relentlessly for the absolute maximum mobilization of every single resource the state possessed. No compromise, total sacrifice.
Culminating in that infamous speech at the Berlin Sport Palace, February 18th.
His most famous public address, broadcast across the nation. He demanded a truly Spartan existence, 14, 16-hour workdays, end of all luxuries, portraying it as the only way to save Germany, indeed Europe, from the barbarism of Bolshevism.
And that ending asking the crowd, Wollt ihr den totalen Krieg? Do you want total war? A rhetorical question met with a manufactured roar of approval. Pure political theater, designed to bind the population to further suffering.
It was peak Goebbels propaganda turning desperation to fanatical.
And his authority was formally recognized shortly after the failed assassination attempt on Hitler in July 1940.
Stauffenberg's bomb.
Right. After that, Hitler appointed Goebbels Reich plenipotentiary for the Total War Act.
Which basically made him Hitler's de facto deputy.
Essentially, yes. Supplanted Goering, confirmed him as the second most powerful man in the Reich, and Hitler's designated successor should happen.
But were his total war measures actually effective at that point?
Not really, no. The Allies' material advantage was just too overwhelming. He did things like raise the mandatory working age for women to 55 to free up men for the front.
But the resources simply weren't there.
Exact. Total war in practice just meant deeper poverty, more hardship, and eventually conscripting old men and young boys, the Volkssturm, for a hopeless final defense.
Yet Goebbels himself never wavered. His propaganda stayed fanatical right to the very end.
Absolutely relentless. Even in April 1945, with Soviet shells falling on Berlin, he published that article, Resistance at Any Price.
What did it say?
Pure fanaticism. The war has reached a stage at which only the full efforts of the nation and of each individual can save us. No village and no city may give in to the enemy. Total denial of reality.
And it was this unwavering, almost insane loyalty that led Hitler to name him as his official successor in his final political test.
Just hours before Hitler killed himself on April 30th, 1945, Goebbels was appointed Chancellor of Germany.
A title he held for barely a day.
Less than that, really. On May 1st, 1945, after a futile attempt to negotiate a ceasefire with the Soviets was rejected, Joseph and Magda Goebbels performed their final horrific act, bunker.
The murder of their children.
They sedated their 6 children, aged 4 to 12, with morphine. Then Magda, likely with help, crushed cyanide capsules in their mouth. Then Joseph and Magda went up to the Chancellery Garden and committed suicide together, ensuring their absolute commitment to the Nazi ideology encompassed the destruction of their a truly ghastly #tag out.
So looking back across this deep dive, what emerges is this picture of a man profoundly shaped by early rejection, by insecurity, who then channeled that into becoming the master manipulator of modern media.
He was absolutely critical in crafting the visual identity of Nazism, the banners, the rallies, the symbols, and then in wartime, the decisive figure controlling information and pushing relentlessly for that fanatical, self-destructive total war.
And the central paradox remains, doesn't he? He seems to have been one of the clearest thinkers among the leadership about the likelihood.
Yes, his diaries show a chilling realism at times about Germany's prospects, yet his absolute personal devotion to Hitler, his immersion in the National Socialist ideology, was so total that he preferred dragging Germany and his own family into utter ruin rather than
his own definition of propaganda success above all else. Regardless of decency, he pursued that right to the horrifying end.
Which brings us back to that statistic we mentioned earlier, that 88% approval for Hitler in the 1934 referendum achieved after just over a year of Goebbels' intensive propaganda.
Yeah.
It forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question, especially for you, the listener, thinking about today. If propaganda is deliberately designed not to appeal to reason, but purely to manipulate emotion and achieve compliance, what responsibility does a society bear when large numbers of its citizens willingly embrace that narrative?
Especially when it's designed solely for success, not truth. What's the defense against information crafted specifically to bypass our critical faculties?
It's a crucial question, particularly now in our age of constant information and disinformation. Something to really think about long after.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.